Chapter 1. Returning to the beginning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A god who loved watching bloody battles the most created a new world to get rid of his boredom. Fight and kill, a reward will be given. If you are lazy, you will die. The god named the bizarre world and started to slowly pour in the life forms he created. As I expected, only one person can go back to the past. Do we need to have a popularity vote? Chaldean, one of the 4 people who were standing in front of the crystal and who had a golden book, muttered while looking around the crystal. A great tool that is said to have the mythical power of sending one to the past. And the last remaining hope of the humankind which entered the abyss 50 years ago and perished. A man in the corner with a massive sword spoke out at those words. I'm going. The strongest person should go. Chaldean laughed at those words. Conte, you've just been lucky and gotten strong by stuffing runes and items. It'll be much better if I go. Chaldean, I acknowledge your intellect, but there were numerous occasions of disagreements when you clowned around with it. I shall go instead. Chaldean stared at Ares and then laughed. Ares, you're too naive. Thinking of the troubles underneath you, you disqualify as well. The 3 who were arguing stopped and stared into the distance. Huge dragons that showed off their massive bodies were flying with incredible speed. The temple in which the crystal resided and the woman who saw the real owners of the crystals, Ares, spoke out with a bittersweet face. It seems like it isn't the time to argue. The fact that the dragons were flying here means that the forces they used to buy time have all been annihilated. If those had died, these 4 were the last of mankind. The golden dragon race was one of the top ruling classes even in the abyss. They weren't opponents for the dragons as they struggled just to get this far. Ares sighed with a regrettable face and spoke while looking at the man with the black hair sitting in the corner. Although it feels a little unfair, there's no other way. Hansu, you go. Everyone agrees. At those words Conte and Chaldean held a reluctant face then sighed as well. Can I really not go? I have confidence I can do well. All right. Don't look at me like that. Petty ones. Conte complained with an extremely pitiful face. Then Hansu sighed with a tired look. Can't I stop fighting now? Hansu shook his head. 50 years since the Great War between the original races who had been dragged into the abyss. The survivors had to fight rigorously every day for 50 years. Just to survive. I've fought too long. Hansu shook his head. As if it's alright to die like this. But Ares' head shook with a firm look. You are the one who has to go. The 4 people here including herself arrived this far because they were the most outstanding of the 7 billion people. They had confidence to do better if they returned to the past, and to do so they needed another chance. But everyone knew inside. He's the one who has to go. The ruler classes of Abyss were so strong that even if they went back in time they didn't have a complete guarantee that they could win against them. However, he started 20 years after they did, yet he stood shoulder to shoulder with them. If he had bloomed his unique potential a little earlier, 5 years earlier, then they wouldn't have been pushed back this far. Hansu looked at the 3 and then spoke out. Say something, I should at least listen to the last words of my friends. If it was anybody else it wouldn't have mattered, but how could he ignore their words? As Hansu watched the 3 with a regrettable look, Conte spoke out first. You. If you have the chance to acquire my runes and items, take them all and use them. Don't I give them to the you of the past? Hansu asked with a surprised face. His items and runes were immeasurable to the point that his nickname was Fate Creator. To the point where a huge problem between them occurred. Yeah, it's better that you use them instead of me. If you're going to do something, do it right. Hansu nodded at those words. Ares, what about you? Don't fling off people who approach you just because it's annoying and take care of them. I will try. Oh come on, you're going to save humanity, aren't you? Think about how cool it is. Listen to the leader. Well, if the situation allows it. Sigh. Hansu turned his back to the sighing Yeris as he asked Keldian last. Keldian, what about you? Oh, by the way, I have no confidence in using my brain as well as you. I have no confidence in collecting all the skills you use either. Keldian replied with a cold face. I don't have much. If you go back to the past. Get rid of those cockroaches who will only be of harm during the Great War. And that light monarch, kill him for sure. That is my request. Hansu nodded and Keldian smiled with a satisfied smile. Then he lifted up his book and started mumbling something. Then shining light bursted out of the crystal and surrounded Hansu as he disappeared with the light. I should rest now. They wanted to go, but they also wanted to rest. They didn't know their true feelings, so they said no in case they regretted it. Since this chance is literally the last chance. However, since it was decided and he was sent off, they clearly knew their true feelings. Since their minds were now at rest. At the same time they felt bad for Hansu. Take care. We leave it up to you. The three watched the disappeared Hansu as they smiled with a mix of regret and relief. Soon the energy blasted out by the golden dragon swept them from above like a storm. Ed's note: we've just started, June 2016, building a wikia. Don't hesitate to contribute as you read along. Chapter 2. Tutorial 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hansu's 5 senses that had been frozen from the light quickly started recovering. It succeeded, but is my head supposed to hurt this much? He knew instinctively that he had really returned to the past. Hansu shook off the headache and then checked his surroundings. When did I come back to? He needed to check exactly when in the past he came back to. Since if he came back too late, then coming back to the past will be pointless. A chaotic situation started flowing into Hansu through his 5 senses. What's this? What is this place? Goddamn. What is this? Is it a hidden camera? 100 or so people were shouting around. The surroundings resembled Gangnam train station, but it was very different. Hyundai building was still standing high, but all the glass was shattered and there was weird vines and trees growing everywhere. A scene as if it's been 10 years after a massive nuclear warfare. It wasn't surprising that people fell into panic. Some people were even provoked to the point where they even started fighting and throwing fists at each other. A really messed up situation. Hansu knew when he came back to from this. It's the first moment when we came to the other dimension. The year that he was born was rather peculiar. It was the year that people started getting abducted all over the world. At first it was 100 at a time and the number increased over time. And the year he turned 20, he also went missing in the real world. Only then Hansu knew where the missing people went. A midway area that was created as the abyss devours the other dimension. The terrain and buildings were like reality, but the contents weren't. This place had many beasts that roamed around due to the influence of the abyss, and there were people with powers who came here before them that roamed around. 5 years later, all the people from the real dimension will be transported to the other world, and after that the passage that links the other world and the abyss will open along with the great war between them and then inhabitants of the abyss. Basically, the 25 years before that are like a tutorial. Something that the people of the real world had to go through before entering the abyss. From a certain angle it looked like benevolence, but to Hansu, it didn't seem that kind-hearted. It seemed like time was given, since it would be boring if they died too simply. Whatever, it's good that I've returned to the beginning. Since he had earned 5 years of time before the abyss had opened. If it was at the moment it opened, he would have been in trouble without being able to do anything, but this was very good. Hansu started checking his body's condition after he understood the current situation. Since you can't move until the fairy comes out and being's the basic tutorial. It's good to have a warm-up before then. As I expected. Tabula rasa. All the skills he knew and the runes he filled his body with were all gone. Well, I can collect them all. Anyway, it should be here now. As Hansu made his decision, something fell from the sky. It's here. Hansu stared at the creature that appeared. The palm-sized fairy looked around at the surrounding people and said with a sweet voice. Hello everyone. I'm a helper here to help you get a quick progress. TSK, Hansu, who clearly knew what that satanic midget's quick progress meant, made him click his tongue. I see it wants to see us fight already. As the fairy appeared and a weird aura spread out, the seemingly uncontrollable situation slowly died down. The fairy was a very eye-catching existence even in this abnormal place. The smiling fairy looked around as the surroundings quieted down and opened its mouth. Firstly, I welcome your entrance to the otherworld. You've now all been granted a wonderful chance. Wait. Wait. What do you mean? What's the otherworld? The fairy stared at the man who threw the question for a while, then it ignored the man as it continued its story. In this place you are all granted infinite freedom. No matter what you do, there is nobody to punish you. All the rules you've been following do not exist here. And that's not all. We can't call that a chance by itself. You all now don't have any physical limits of the past. What? You all can now become infinitely strong depending on what you do. Like a hero from a movie. As the fairy looked at the confused people, its smile didn't disappear as it opened its mouth again. I will show you a quick demonstration. Since I came to hasten the progress. The fairy pointed its finger at the man who talked to it first. And then from the feeble and delicate fingers, a light beam came out and penetrated the man's heart. Puk ku kook. I don't like people who talk a lot. And at that moment everyone realized that the new environment was not entirely favorable towards them. You up. Up. Very good. Shall we continue? And then the fairy flew towards the man's corpse. And then something weird happened. Above the man's body, a translucent and shining symbol the size of a hand appeared. The fairy grabbed the symbol and spoke. This is every living organism or anything else, if you kill it, it will come out like this. Though what comes out is random. The fairy, who said something frightening as if it was nothing, looked around as it continued its speech. Let's see. This improves the strength of one's muscles. Who should I give this to? Everyone hesitated. Because they might get caught in the same situation as the corpse if they acted out. At that point Hansu raised his hand. How much he liked the fairy was secondary. One rune gave a tremendous amount of help in the beginning. And plus there was no risk involved. There was no reason to not raise his hand. The fairy looked at Hansu and gave a content look. Very good. That determined action. Put this on the top of your hand. And then the rune was absorbed into his body. From the outside there was not much difference. But the fairy looked at Hansu with a smile. Isn't it amazing? The runes break the laws. Your muscles were only able to lift 117.1 kilograms scientifically, but it had been increased to 122.3 kilograms. As Hansu gave a nonchalant face, the fairy, as if it got awkward, turned around and continued talking. The reaction is pretty bland. Anyway, there are a lot of different abilities one can raise and there are a lot of runes to follow that. And in those there are special abilities that the science you played around with cannot explain. Let's see. It'd be nice to show something one more time. Then the fairy looked around. Everyone got frightened and shriveled up from the expression of hunting for prey. That expression was accurate. It wanted to kill another one for its rune for experiment. The fairy shrugged its shoulders as it looked around. Let's stop. Since I like the number 100. Anyway, keep that in mind. There is nothing bad about any rune that raises anything. If you want to be strong from now on, you need to collect a lot of runes. Your muscles won't improve no matter how much you do push-ups. At those words everyone started to look around and backed off slowly. If they were killed, a rune will come out, and if one took that, they will become stronger. Because they would imagine what would happen at the worst situation. The fairy enjoyed the weird atmosphere as it smiled contently as it opened its mouth. If you touch your right ear, you can see which runes you have. Humans seemed like they like things in numbers, so to give determination we implemented it 15 years ago. You just need to know that the human average is 10. At those words everyone started touching their ears. Kong Hansu, strength .11 stamina. 9, strength was increased by 1. A crappy and simple configuration. But everyone is like this at first. It'd be weird if normal people had mana. As one hunted and collected runes, their mana, magic, physical defense and magic resistance will be added. No matter if the hunted were humans or beasts. He will probably be around 17. Hansu mumbled as he saw a muscular man in the distance. A well-trained body. At that point he's a high rank out of these people. 11 and 17 was only 1.5 times in difference, but it was not that simple. However, he will be in a superior situation in the beginning with that much. It'll be a lot for a woman to have 3 or 4. The fairy smiled and spoke as it looked at the commotion. The starting line may be unfair. But where you used to live was like that too, right? Well, I will give you a bonus, so don't be sad. The fairy touched its butt as it spoke. And then the people started touching their butts without thinking. Something was there. They saw what came out of their pockets and their faces turned white. A sharp dagger, which didn't exist before they came here, came out of their pockets. Normally this would be very reassuring, but the thoughts becoming prey for items and the person next to them also having this was not pleasant at all. The fairy laughed as it watched. You'll at least need that to do something. Forget about the past and take the chance that was given to you. The tutorial I created will begin now, so good luck. The fairy disappeared into a hole which suddenly appeared. As the fairy disappeared, people started to mumble. A tutorial. As everybody was tense from the words of a being that shot through somebody's heart, a sound was heard from somewhere. As everybody was on alert, they looked towards the origin of the noise. Kayak. Tiny green monsters with a deformed look. Goblin. As everyone saw a familiar look from the movies, their face changed into fear. The fairy appeared and told them something. It was a tutorial. It was simple, but the words of the thing that killed somebody so simply could not be that simple. And there were more than 200 of them. Although they had 100 people and the sizes of the goblins were only half their size, standing still with a calm mind would be abnormal. But it seems like the goblins had the same thoughts, as they only stared at them fiercely and didn't approach them. In this tense situation, somebody spoke quietly from the back. Don't stimulate them and slowly move backwards. Everyone nodded at those words. They were all in consensus in silence. They saw it from the news. No matter what you could do, always run away if the opponent had a sharp object in their hands. They also had daggers, but who would want to fight sword to sword with those things? However, Hansu shook his heads. Those things were really evil-minded. How could they throw in a few midgets and call it a tutorial? Ha! As they walked back slowly, somebody stopped and moaned. And that somebody got frustrated and spoke out. What are you doing? Keep moving. We need to get away. The man replied at those words. No, this is weird. Something is here. Mid.air, what? People started moving towards in a hurry at those words. And then shouted in frustration. Fuck. What is this? It's blocked. Here too. People started hitting the wall as they shouted about. At that point somebody pointed something out. Hey. This thing is slowly moving towards us. What? People started leaning against the wall at those words. And they all frowned. The wall was slowly pushing them back. Ki-eek. As they heard the cries from far away they looked in that direction. At that location the goblins were also getting pushed towards them. As something kept pushing them they grew frustrated and started hacking away at the void but nothing happened. Ka-uk. Fuck. As they saw the goblins staring at them they gripped their daggers harder. At this point they had to fight no matter what. At that moment, somebody fell to the other side. Huh. What? How did you get there? I don't know. It just happened to be that way here. One person got through the clear wall. And in the air where the man passed through a number came up. 0.49. As people mumbled around somebody looked around and then quickly ran towards that location. And the number changed. And at that point everyone realized. 50 people could leave. And the remaining 50 had to fight with those things. And then everyone started running towards the tiny gap. Fucking move. I will go out. Kya. Hansu shook his head at this scene. If 100 people fought seriously they could probably win. They will probably die but at least 20 will survive. But if this happens the story changes. In reality, as the goblins saw the people fighting with each other, their eyes shone and they started running towards them fiercely. When he first came here, 40 of them died to the goblins. First, clear up the situation and then move to the next stage. There were too many things to do. As he made his decision, his whole body started wriggling around as his muscles tensed up. Proofreader's note: took me a while for me to actually start proofreading this, sorry boss. Why didn't I start this earlier? This looks like an interesting read. I can't wait to read, and proofread, the next chapter. Apologies for any grammatical mistakes you may see. Was watching anime and proofreading at night. XD Kabato-chan's note UF*** King Slave. Whip. Chapter 3. Tutorial 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The previous Nagamaki will be changed to Padao. The whole body's muscles started squirming around at a minuscule level. His body, which he wasn't accustomed to due to it being from many decades ago, quickly moved according to Hansu's will. Hansu, who had prepared his body, slowly walked towards the goblins who were running towards him in a crazy manner. Those are trying so hard to get here, so what's the point of him running? Every bit of stamina to swing the dagger was important. Hansu deflected a goblin's arm while it was swinging the sword Keek. Hansu's body, which seemed to be out on a stroll to watch a mountain, suddenly changed fiercely while the goblin was flustered. As if he released all the strength he gathered up. All the runes were gone. All the skills were also gone. But the same strength, the same stamina or the same perception had a huge difference depending on how it was used. The body was basically a tool of battle, and depending on the way the tool is used, the final outcome will have a difference between heaven and earth. Hansu rushed between the goblins just like that and started slashing madly in all directions. Ki-eek. The goblins, who were running, screamed in a beastly manner and rolled about on the floor. And in the spot the goblins dropped, two things were left. A padao, which was crude but much more threatening than a dagger. A much tinier rune. Hansu spread out his right hand, grabbed the padao and swinged it hard as he grabbed the rune with his left hand at the time same. And at that moment a part of Hansu's body changed slightly. My luck is good, Kong Hansu, strength. 11 agility. 10.1 stamina. 9 as a rune that rose agility by 0.1, Hansu's status menu changed. Agility, which wasn't needed to be shown, appeared. In a sense, one's strength is what made one faster, but agility was a little different. The user's time twists and it becomes 0.1 times faster, and their reaction speed becomes faster as well as the same movement being slightly faster. As agility rises, the user started to live in a different dimension. Every rune stat other than strength and stamina, which was already given to humans, all start at 10 due to them not existing prior to that. Hansu moved his now faster body without hesitation towards the goblins who were rushing towards them and started to cut them into blocks. Sometimes it didn't come out, and only small ones came out when it did, but since numbers were numbers, Hansu's rune stats rose slowly but surely. Of course, with his current status, no matter how weak goblins are, killing 200 alone was a bit far-fetched. The pedal was so feeble that 2 or 3 swings broke it, and Hansu kept changing his weapons as he fought the goblins. Injuries rose by 1 and 2 as well. And the people who saw that stopped and stared at each other. At this rate, they will all die. Not from goblins, but from humans' hands. And they also started to have greed. It seemed like runes were very important. But as one person ate it all, they felt anxious. And as they gained courage as they saw Hansu, who only seemed to be a college student, fight so well. From afar, his actions looked very sloppy. The actions were not flashy but rather only created due to him protecting himself, but as they saw the goblins falling to those slashes, the goblins seemed very weak. Fuck that shit, I don't know anymore. Yua. The people grinded their teeth, but carefully approached Hansu's back and started fighting. Kiek. The goblins stared at the humans who were charging towards them with a panicked look, but then started fighting with a roar. And then chaos started. Ahk. Goddamit. Help me. They held one dagger. They knew they had to fight. They knew they would get stronger if they fought. The opponent wasn't that strong. But even then, they were just commoners. And the enemies were armed with a weapon, despite it being feeble, as well as having a large amount of killing intent. A lot of injuries were occurring from all directions. But even in that situation, Hansu continued to kill goblins as he absorbed runes and slowly walked forward. Honestly, there was no need to rush while receiving a lot of injuries. He could hide between the people and fight slowly as if he was peeling an apple and kill more leisurely. But there was a reason why he rushed despite receiving injuries. There is no time to dilly-dally. Including this location, there were countless amounts of adventurers. There are probably over 10,000. The 100 people here was not everybody. There are probably a few hundred of these just for Korea. If we include the world, there are many more. But everyone was new first years. There were no adventurers from previous years. They probably didn't come here from kindness because of the newbies. This location will be protected for 3 months as the tutorial area. If things like this didn't exist, all the upper years would come, kill everyone and take their runes. With only 1 year of experience, one can kill 100 of them very easily. From a point of view, it seemed like the benevolence of the fairy, but Hansu's thoughts were different. How to say it? Created to enjoy the chaotic fight between weaklings. It seemed like it was made because it would be boring if a strong person came and wiped out everybody. Whatever the reason, this was a chance. In 3 months they will have to collide against people who've been here for 2 or 3 years. With that in mind, they must become strong fast. Due to Hansu flying about quickly in the front, the fight ended rather quickly. As the battle ended and the tension was released, the people couldn't bear the fatigue and fell onto the floor. About 16 people died. A much better loss than in the past. If Hansu wasn't here, at least 30 would have died. While the 100 fought 200, the number of goblins Hansu killed by himself was at least 70. And the surrounding people stared at him tiredly. As the people thought of Hansu's mad actions of slashing in every direction with his padao and dagger and slowly moved their distance away from him, the fairy appeared. Wow! The grade is really good here. Well, from now you should know how to survive from this point. Fucking son of a mayfly. The people couldn't curse out loud, so they did it inwardly. It was rather easy to realize who put up the goddamn wall. I will get rid of the wall now. From now, do it just like this. Fighting. As the fairy disappeared, people started mumbling. Hansu shook his head and then checked his stat. Kong Hansu, Strength. 14.3 Agility. 10.9 Stamina. 10.1 Perception. 11.2 It's not bad. Hansu nodded his head. As he expected, agility runes don't come out easily. And maybe due to it being a tutorial, skills didn't come out. But compared to the 3 he killed when he started off in the past, it was not that bad. As he also got perception runes which increases his overall perception, the start was pretty good. I even got something like this. Hansu laughed as he saw the sword with a sharp edge. This well-balanced and sharp padao was one of the more useful items out of the ones you can get in the beginning. It wasn't a great weapon, but compared to the ones that lost their edge with a few swings, it was much better. With the dagger attached inside and the padao attached by his waist, his whole body had multiple scars. Since he rushed in order to end it fast. Hansu, who had finished his basic preparations, thought of the things he needed to do at this moment. Firstly, I won't be able to meet them. He was a first-year adventurer. On the other hand, Chaldean, Conte and Iris were 19 to 20 years adventurers. Since they started 20 years ahead, they were probably running way ahead of him. So Hansu thought of the next thing. Well, telling them about the abyss is rejected. The dimensional corrosion of the abyss was sped up depending on how much the corroded dimension knew about the strength, intel and skill of the abyss. Like ink spreading in the water. If intel about the abyss were to spread, the invasion of the abyss will start earlier. First, strengthening myself is of utmost importance. He was here to change the flow of water. But the strength to change that flow of water was the start and of utmost importance. And with that Hansu thought of his friends. Iris, Conte and Chaldean. It was planned that they were to all return together with him. Unlike him, who had become strong by struggling intensively, their every action was close to a guidebook. And their survival was because of their strength. How did they say they did it? They told him in the past. How they got strong in the beginning. Iris told him. Rejected. It didn't fit his personality, and more than anything one needed to be at the level of Iris to do that. Next is Chaldean. And Chaldean ate all the runes as he quickly rushed out. In my view, Chaldean might have stimulated them a little. But Hansu shook his head. There was the words of Iris and him, who had come to save the humankind. Doing that sort of thing is absurd. And there was more bad than good on the long term if that were to happen. If you kill somebody, a rune will appear, but it didn't mean that the person who took the rune will become as strong as the dead person combined with them. Since runes didn't drop in large numbers. In reality, the man who died earlier had more than 20 together if you combined his strength and stamina, but the only thing that was dropped was a strength rune. If you see from the point of a society, coexistence was the answer. That was the reason why Iris, who had included everyone, was able to stay as a leader until the end. More than anything else, if you were to think of his plans, killing a person to get a rune is forbidden. It might be different if they were to kill though. How did Conte say he did it? This doesn't help either. His luck was too good. Agility was one of the most useful stats out of the beginning stats. The increase of reaction speed allowed one to easily dominate over others. And there should be a limit to how lucky one can be, killing a tutorial goblin and getting a regeneration rune. The methods of those 3 did not fit him. Actually, their methods were a bit lacking. He needed a way to leap over their standards and rush forward with dominance. And Hansu knew about that. Something like this existed. A long time ago, one of his comrades from the final brigade told him. The tutorial area where 10,000 people were trapped for 3 months. In this place, there was a hidden dungeon. For a beginner, the difficulty was out of the question. So getting to the end was a failure. But just getting to that point will allow one to have an immense head start that cannot be compared to others. He, who had only gotten to the halfway mark after a long struggle, got strong enough to the point of becoming one of the final brigade. Becoming one of the final brigade meant that one was within the top 100 strongest people of mankind. And for that, it was one of the most important location for the tutorial area. This world was not fit for mankind to survive, but one thing was clear. Something that was harder, seemed close to impossible, will grant a larger reward when completed. First, I must gain that. Hansu made his primary goal. Kabata-chan's note changed Nagamaki to Padao, Bakdo in Korean. Chapter 4. Tutorial 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In that case, I have something I need to solve first. Hidden piece. If it did indeed exist, then it would be something an evil god would have hidden, something that is way better than something you could gain in the beginning. From what he heard, the difficulty of the final dungeon located in the tutorial area was not set for a beginner to clear. The survivors of mankind were all geniuses, but no one had reached the end. Something that must be gathered for that. The hidden pieces within the tutorial area. To clear the final dungeon, he must monopolize every remaining hidden piece and become stronger. Let's see. The first hidden piece was said to be gained if one entered the nearest train station. The tutorial was 2 stages. The first stage, where the first 100 people act together. For 1 week the 100 people stay in the designated area, and then for 3 months after that the second stage, where they hunt in another designated area, begins. And when those 2 stages are over, the protective area is released and they can meet with the previous year's people. To his knowledge, there were 2 hidden pieces in the first stage of the tutorial. First stage, which meant after 1 week those 2 hidden pieces will disappear. He needed to find them before then. Hansu got up from his spot. I'm heading to Gangnam Station. The location of the first hidden piece was Gangnam Station. By the time Hansu got up to start heading to that place, there was already a chaotic situation. I knew this would happen. Hansu clicked his tongue at the screams from multiple directions. Why are you doing this? Ach. We will go separately. Go where? We need to group in order to survive. In the location where the battle ended, people were making an uproar here and there. Their opinions probably differed. There was a lot of small fights here and there. Between the people who wanted to act by themselves and those who wanted to group. Normally, if their desires were that different, it's normal to separate. Because there will only be problems if you hold on to somebody with a different opinion. But if one side wanted the other side a lot, and if for that they didn't want to let them go, a problem occurs. Since there were over 100 people, there were people who had more beauty than others. And for the same reason, since there's 100 people, there are a few who get used to the new world quickly as well. Ah, seriously. Suddenly from the location where people were gathered, a group with 3 males and 4 females dashed out and ran towards Hansu's location. Hey, where are you going? With that level of beauty? It will definitely be a problem. Maybe it was because they were at Gangnam Station and were brought here, their appearances were above average. And one was seriously of a different class. Suddenly one woman looked towards that side and shouted. We will act separately. We are going to work with this person here. As Hansu heard the frantic calls, he frowned. Hey! Hansu! Why are you pretending to not know us? We're acquaintances. Oh. Right. Hansu nodded then, as if he just remembered. Because everyone died right off the start, he didn't remember his college acquaintances. There was no way he could remember them after 50 years. He had forgotten already, but after this situation occurred he started to remember it bit by bit. Oh yeah, we came 4 to 4. To get closer to each other. From the other side a 30-something looking man ran towards them while breathing excessively out of his nose, and then was startled after he saw Hansu. That guy is... He remembered. The guy who was advancing as he crazily slashed apart the goblin-looking beasts. He was so good at fighting that while the others were struggling with 2 to 3 of them, he alone killed multiple tens of them. Does he do some sort of sport? The guy, Taesung kept contemplating. He understood that that guy was strong. But as the fairy told them before, he was not at the level of transcended heroes and he was not alone. And he looks hurt too. As Hansu saw the squirming Taesung, Hansu clicked his tongue. This is why it's problematic. Normally they wouldn't even think of fighting. The hype of the battle has not yet disappeared. Their first injury and their first time with violence, and with the results on top of that giving them confidence, could clearly be seen in their excitement. And the others were the same. It will be hard to judge with reason. There was no reason to have a scrimmage here. Since the time period where he got mad from these things to the point where he fought was long gone. And there was no reason to meet him again, and there was no time to stay here either. Hansu walked as his back faced the man who was staring at him. As Hansu started to walk off fast, Taesung had a bewildered face and watched him. This bitch leaving a person in front of him. Hey, where are you going? Then Hansu suddenly got curious. What this person would say to him. Is there something you want to say? Do I set my age as 76 or 20? He wondered if he should be formal or informal, but then he decided to go with the easier route. And from Hansu's words Taesung made a shocked face. What? This young bitch? Yeah. What do I say? To ask of something excessive, the previous actions of Hansu's flying about crazily scared him, but then to let him go, the four women behind him were regretful. When Taesung was shocked, the man who was standing behind him spoke with an impatient look. We aren't really bad people either. Let's act together. It seems like you eight are young, wouldn't it be better to work together? It seems there will be a lot of times where strength will be used from now on. And then the people who agreed with his words gathered behind him. No, it's not that they agreed. From the atmosphere it seemed like they knew each other. Hansu stared at the man, who seemed like the leader, who had talked to him. His eyes. There were a lot of people like this. Those who get used to things way too quickly. No, it's more fitting to say that they were restricted in the world they used to live in. And now, since those restrictions were gone, they were like a fish that had met water. Hansu thought for a moment to choose between the dying wishes of Iris and Chaldean, and then made a decision. Iris, you are saving a lot of people, I will let them go once. Honestly, pulling out the roots when they hadn't done anything yet was not in his character. And even himself, his stats were still pretty average. He needed to get out, but killing everyone here and leaving, the time for hidden pieces would be rather tight. Hansu replied abruptly. Dismissed. Having a lot of people wasn't bad. Since it made hunting much easier. But people who were even interested in funeral food were bound to make trouble. Hansu, who had finished talking, searched around the goblin corpses and bound 2 more padeos onto his waist and then started to walk. The remaining friends looked at each other in the eyes, then followed him from behind. This son of a bitch. Taesung, who had been watching Hansu, gritted his teeth and stepped forward, but Gilte blocked him. As Taesung watched his elder brother Gilte's actions with a weird look, Gilte opened his mouth. This isn't the time to be fighting with them. They can be dealt with after everything is organized. We must first get this place in order. And then Gilte looked around at the 70 or so people remaining. The current situation was already chaotic. A strange place with strange beasts. And that damnable fairy too. Since it was already chaotic, keeping those who would make trouble would only be hard on him to control them. First, set the atmosphere here. From one view, this chaotic period is a chance. Gilte stared at the location where they disappeared intensely for a while and then stomped his way into the crowd. The man Taesun stared at Hansu, who was walking in front of him in a ragged manner, with a complicated look. I'm not sure if this was the right move. But Taesun shook his head. If they stayed in there, a real division would have occurred. Humans were scarier than goblins. And being next to this guy in front of his eyes made him feel safer. Logically it didn't make sense that being next to one person felt safer than 70, but that's how it was. Anyway. He knew that that guy was peculiar. Starting all the way back from OT he was in the corner in a daze. Asterisk OT equals orientation, as if he was thinking of something different. And he also said he was an orphan. And from that he seemed like a weak target. The reason why he brought him today was because if there was somebody lesser than him around he would stand out more. TSK, but he didn't know he was like that. As Tae-soon remembered Han-soo fighting manically in the front, he watched Mi-hee with a regrettable face as she was staring at Han-soo. He then cleared his throat and spoke. "Hey Han-soo. Do you really not remember us?" At those words Han-soo looked at Tae-soon, who asked him, and then spoke. "I think I've gotten amnesia when we got here. I don't really remember much." "Hey. Why did the way you talk turn like an old man's? Does it show that much?" Mi-hee smiled softly at those words. Han-soo stared at her. The other three weren't bad, but even out of them she had a beauty that stood out. At that level living life was pretty easy. But in the other world, beauty was a double-edged sword. If you have the confidence to use it well it becomes a weapon, but if you drop it then you invite all sorts of crooks. Well. She'll figure it out herself. Han-soo stopped his thoughts and kept moving. Mi-hee stared at that Han-soo and spoke cautiously. "But where are you going right now?" Han-soo was constantly walking toward somewhere since the start. As if he knew the exact directions. Han-soo gave a short reply to that question. "Inside Gangnam train station." "Why there?" Han-soo pondered for a moment. "If I travel alone I don't need to explain all these, but this is rather annoying." But since he decided to keep Irisa's words as much as possible he gave a short reply instead. "I'm getting a feeling." Feeling. Yeah. It seems that with the loss of memory, I seem to have gained psychic powers. I'm getting a feeling that I must go there. It was too annoying to explain every single bit, and they will probably believe him if he said that he gained psychic powers. Well. Even fairies exist, so if I say psychic powers they will understand somewhat. And he didn't really lie either. If one's actually really lucky they can get a rune with something called the sixth sense within it. Han-soo, who had organized things in a simple manner, started to walk forward and the others looked at Han-soo and made a weird expression. His actions were weird from the beginning, but psychic powers. Is it okay for us to follow that guy? Jisuan, who was standing behind Mi-hee, whispered to her boyfriend Gangtae softly. But they couldn't escape Han-soo's enhanced hearing. Han-soo smirked as he spoke. "You don't really have to follow me. I'm the type that respects personal preferences." Han-soo, who headed forward without hesitation, went down the steps to the 12th exit that came into view. They made a med-like face and then followed Han-soo. Honestly, beasts more than humans, humans more than fairies gave them more of a fear from their plots. It'd be nice if he really had psychic powers. Tae-soon, who was mumbling inwardly, went down to the train station and then looked at Han-soo, then spoke after realizing. "Ah. Are you preparing a place to live?" Han-soo nodded at those words. "Unfortunately there are some friends who already live here." Kuwaak, and then Han-soo slashed his pedao downwards. Chapter 5. Gangnam Station, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Kayak. A beastly sound was heard from below as green blood spluttered out. Tae-soon, who had seen this, was scared out of his wits. "What is it?" "Green worm." This place looked like Gangnam train station, but it was not anymore. It copied the looks of the Gangnam train station, but one could look at it as a dungeon. And green worms were one of the most widely spread mobs of the tutorial area. They don't like sunlight, so they stay underground and they come out after feeling the vibrations above ground. If someone were to be bitten by that somewhat lacking mouth, chunks of flesh getting ripped off was a given. Well, they still give runes. From one point of view, it is very dangerous. If you get bitten once and fall down you will die without being able to do anything. But there was an easy way to deal with these guys. Hansu ruthlessly hacked down on the heads as he spoke. If you aren't confident then walk on the unbroken granite. If you see somewhere that's broken and earth is exposed, stab it with your sword. Oh, and be careful of your hand when you stab. Right below the granite was soil, confirming that this place just copied the looks of Gangnam train station. How do you know all of this? As Taesoon asked with a suspicious look, Hansu replied very simply. Psychic powers. At those words the seven who had been eyeing Hansu with a terrified face carefully walked on the granite as they stabbed the areas with exposed soil. Kaiyik. Hansu shook his head at the way they stabbed the earth ruthlessly. 4 of them are useful. 3 aren't quite there yet. Surprisingly the females were leading. Mihi and Jisuan were stabbing the earth with clenched teeth and Taesoon and Jisuan's boyfriend were also stabbing the earth zealously. But the remaining 3 were perhaps afraid of the green worms who came out screaming, they were just watching quietly from the back. Hansu didn't really care about those 3. There was no reason to get upset because they didn't join in on the fight. Because the work will eventually fall onto him anyway. Soon there were tiny runes shining everywhere. Hansu was picking the runes that came out from his killings then turned around and asked with a weird look. Why aren't you picking them up? Then Taesoon laughed awkwardly. No, it's nothing much but. Isn't it better for you to take them all? Even in games we do something where we give everything to one person. Everyone nodded a little bit. Just because you eat runes it didn't mean you would become strong like Superman. But if at that instant, if they were to get caught by those beastly things and get tetanus or something then they would just die. If they give all these runes to Hansu and his protection is safer, it's a better option. Hansu shook his head at those words. The things you kill, you take. This was not his thoughts. If they were going to become enemies from the start it wouldn't really matter, but if they are going to travel together they at least needed some rules. And this was the most basic rule that they followed in order to stay together for decades when roaming around the abyss. As I expected due to it being the start. Thinking that they will protect you because they eat the runes is a very flawed idea. Why would they since we're friends? Thoughts like if I'm this nice to them they will reward me with something. When a situation where one's life is on the line comes along, a relationship built on each other's likes disappear like bubbles. So far reality is still in check but soon after they will realize it. A situation where one's life is in danger isn't far off in this place. In conclusion the only thing you can trust is your own ability. If you are useless you will get thrown off immediately. They will realize it eventually and once they do they will zealously go for runes and become red-eyed. The above rule was created because of that. I'm not their babysitter, they've got to handle things themselves. At that moment Taesoon mumbled softly in the corner. Hey, look over here. There's a special rune here. At those words everyone gathered around. Everyone saw it for the first time but from instinct they knew what use this rune had. If one takes this then they can use skills huh? Taesoon mumbled as he stole glances at Hansu. The object gives rise to the desire. Before, Hansu coolly said that they should distribute the runes but if his eyes turn at the sight of these new runes and he says that he will take it, Taesoon had no way of stopping him. Can I really take this? Then Hansu nodded his head. Hansu even knew the identity of that rune. It's a pretty good rune at the start, a rune that made your skin hard and increased regeneration. A rune which holds both defense and regeneration in the beginning where survival is important. And that rune was almost like a passive where learning had no restrictions and didn't take mana. You get more gluttonous but for the benefit you get, it's worth it. Food can be stolen once you get stronger and won't be a problem. But Hansu shook his head. I cannot learn skills freely. Usually one learned a few tens of skills. It's not erasable but there isn't really anything you need to give up to learn the skill. The strength of the skill changes according to proficiency and rank, but since there's no risk of learning, there's no harm in learning it. Someone with a good sense and a lot of mana sometimes has over 100 and Keldian had over 1,000. And since he was able to use all those skills properly, he was one of the strongest four. Conte was the strongest, but if they actually fought, Keldian was not a joke either. But he could not be like that. A nickname given by Ares after seeing his peculiar characteristic. A characteristic that allowed him to catch up to Conte, Keldian, Ares and stand shoulder to shoulder with them despite starting 20 years late. And the characteristic that was the deciding factor that made the others send him to the past instead of themselves. The time he realized his characteristics was when he first learned a skill. The first skill he learned was, but as soon as the rune was implemented to his body he knew he made a mistake which could not be changed. To be specific, the amount of runes that was allowed for him was 7. Ares always lamented. The limit of 7 was a huge disadvantage. But more so than that, there's a huge advantage to it. The speed at which the proficiency of the skill rises is surprisingly fast. At an incredible speed. And the skill even breaks the limit and keeps on evolving afterwards. The skill he learned, Dororo Lizard's Essence, which basically just gave fast regeneration, evolved to the point where it was comparable to his immortal technique he learned. Eventually the Dororo Lizard's Essence was like that. The scrubby skills which he learned as a final resort in order to survive eventually strengthened as he struggled. Upgraded to the point of Keldian's Void Ripper and upgraded to the point where it got as strong as blood magic. In the abyss where a strong skill was important, this was a talent of blessing. And for that Ares firmly told him before he came back to the fast. Make sure to carefully select before deciding on the 7 skills. And he was thinking of doing that if all went according to his plans. According to my plans. There's nothing before exiting the tutorial area. Then I'm going to learn it. The surrounding friends stared jealously at Taesoon, who was very happy. And soon when Taesoon absorbed the rune a change occurred. Wriggle Taesoon's skin temporarily showed a bit of green then returned. There wasn't much change, but Taesoon knew the second he learned what kind of change happened to his body. The tired body started to have minuscule amounts of vitality flowing into it, and the skin which had been grazed by the teeth of the green worm started to heal. And a newly appeared stat. A stat called Physical Resistance appeared. Taesoon touched his ears. Park Taesoon, Strength. 11.1 Agility. 10.1 Stamina. 12.5, plus 1.5, Perception. 10.3 Physical Resistance. 10.7, plus 0.7, Ekral Troll Tribe's Essence, Proficiency 1%. Good, the proficiency was only at 1%, but quite a lot of stats went up, dumbass, giving me something like this. If it was him, he would never have given it. Hierarchy should be used when one has it. I will catch up to you. Taesoon, who had counted the number of runes, watched Hansu with a confident smile. While Taesoon was doing that, Hansu checked his stats. Kong Hansu, Strength. 15.3 Agility. 12.1 Stamina. 12.1 Perception. 13.2, it's not bad, the level where it was not bad, but rather it was extremely fast-paced compared to the past. Hansu shook his head as he continued forward. But at that moment Taesoon came next to Hansu as he spoke. It'll be dangerous from now on, so let's go together. And as Hansu saw Taesoon steal a glance at me, he shook his head. There's no way that he's seeing me as a competitor. Actually, this much was cute. In the future one won't know how it will change. Whatever happens, it isn't bad. Even if they split the runes, the speed was fast, so the rate at which the runes increased was faster compared to when he hunted alone. He was worried that he might be in the way, but he was at least working enough for one person. With the 2 as the lead, the 8 kept on going forwards. Thankfully a little bit of light came through half-broken down roofs, so there wasn't much issue in going forward. Though it was a little hard to see. Quadaduke. Maybe it was because they got greedy after seeing a skill, since everyone was greedily slashing down upon green worms, but they could still not compare to Taesoon and Hanso's speed. Anyways. That guy doesn't even have a skill, but he's so much faster than me. Taesoon looked at Hansu with a slightly jealous look. Due to the new skill, he could dash in with a little less fear. That was the reason why his hunting speed rose. But that guy ruthlessly dove between green worms as if he was invincible and slashed down on heads. No. I will win. Taesoon, who could not accept that a guy who was quietly stuck in a corner was much better than him, was slashing down on green worms even more zealously than before as he advanced slowly. Mihi cautiously trailed behind and asked Hansu. But why are we going downwards? Hansu replied to those words. To ride the subway. The subway. As Taesoon looked at the collapsing train station with no electricity, he looked at Hansu with suspicion. Chapter 6. Gangnam Station, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Hansu thought of the words that Minchul, who was part of the final brigade, had told him. He asked because it was so spontaneous. How did you know about it? And then Minchul grinded his teeth. It seemed like a simple suggestion, but there was a problem. This train leaves after 1 day. And that's why it was a hidden piece that needed to be solved by today. Just falling into a weird place was enough to shock somebody, but there will not likely be someone who will crawl into the 3rd floor of a monster-filled cave. But just getting to the final brigade meant that you were an abnormal person, and there were about 4 people who knew about this, and they all got something different. But they all received artifacts. And the fact that it was very useful during the beginning. Let's see what comes out. Eventually Hansu's group had their eyes on the entrance that led further down. Mihi mumbled inwardly. This isn't Gangnam Station. Never had she heard of this entrance while traveling back and forth through Gangnam Station tens of times. Are you really going in? When Mihi asked with an anxious look as she looked at the entrance which permeated a creepier aura, Hansu merely shrugged. I don't know either. I'm just going by how I feel. By the way, anybody can stop following whenever they want to. If you think about it, there was not really a reason to follow him down. And there was plenty of game around here too. Since there were many green worms left. I'm going in. Taesoon said confidently first. And Mihi, who was contemplating what to do, said while biting down hard. I'm going in too. She must be feeling pressured. Hansu nodded his head. She probably understood the situation before. Someone like her is in a more dangerous situation than others. Right now, her face was not a blessing but a curse. If she wasn't going to slash her face, she needed to get stronger. Would it be enough even if she slashed her face? Hansu shook his head after seeing Mihi's body, which was almost about to burst. Jisuan and Gangtae, who were a couple, spoke after staring at each other. We will stay here. We can just hunt here. Hansu nodded his head. That was not a bad plan at all. It's a good choice to raise your stats while the people higher up are bickering back and forth. And one of the 3 people who were fighting on a small scale, Sangjin, who was following from behind with a scared expression, opened his mouth as well. I will go down too. Everyone made a surprised face at those words, but Sangjin just bit his lips and didn't say anything. And with that it was decided that 4 will stay and 3 will go down. Hansu ruthlessly moved his body downwards. He said that it'll be here when I come down. Hansu, who had come down to the 2nd floor, looked around. Before coming here he had heard everyone's individual tutorial area stories. They were old stories, but due to it being their first impactful experience, everyone remembered it to an extent. The result was all different. The mobs and landscape in the tutorial area comprise of thousands of different kinds, and what was in here was going to be random. But they all had something in common. As I thought, it exists. On the 2nd floor of the train station, a convenience store was always placed there. As if they were rewarding you. Wah! Mihi shouted as she approached the store. The lights were off but there were plenty of goods including fresh water inside. Mihi, Taesoon and Sangjin went in and started to collect some necessities. There's even cigarettes, what each took were different. Taesoon took a few kitchen knives that looked like they could be used as a weapon, then found a belt-like object to hold them. Mihi blushed as she gathered a few goods like sanitation pads cautiously in the corner. Hansu, who was looking at that, went into one of the corners of the store. It's closer to a market than a convenience store. Hansu nodded as he saw pots to Bunsen burners and even portable burners. As Mihi saw Hansu, who was getting ready to boil something in the corner, she asked with a strange look. Anyways, why did you bring those? Mihi looked at a pouch in Hansu's hands with a puckery face. Hansu had cut the goblin leather into a suitable size, then brought the blood of the green worm within it. Hansu didn't reply to those words and started to weigh the items on the scale meant for mail. It's been innovated with extreme detail. Anyways, it was 800 g of green worm blood and 225 g of goblin leather. Hansu, who had weighed everything with extreme detail, poured the blood in one pot and then ripped up the goblin leather, put it in the same pot and proceeded to boil it. Soon, when the blood started to boil, something fascinating happened. The goblin leather started to melt. Good, a green worm, when goblins invaded, bit off the goblin and then sprayed blood from an injury in its mouth to melt down the leather. And goblins, to retaliate, evolved to counter this. If the blood of the green worm was to touch their leather, it would become poisonous. The two species probably lived in the same area for a long time. Whatever happened, the poison made this way showed a powerful might in the beginning. Hansu started to carefully smear the dark red liquid onto the blade. And Taesoon, Sangjin and Mihi, who had gathered around, watched as if it was fascinating. What is he making? Taesoon made a slightly suspicious face as he spoke. And Hansu replied very simply. It's poison. How do you know the method? Psychic powers, the knowledge is springing up in my head. Seriously, I thought my head was going to explode while memorizing these. Hansu shook his head as he thought of Keldian and the alchemist, Rahiman, who had grilled him. Hansu's magic stat was very high, but just because the magic stat rose did not mean intellect rose. Only that the power of the skill increased. Hansu's information that he had painstakingly learned was called by adventurers. Since even though getting items was important, creating and enhancing them was also of great importance. If you go to the ones from earlier years, there are clans or magi who research these professionally. Normally a magi like Keldian learned and produced these, but the other three in the group of four, other than Keldian, went through tons of stress in order to memorize these. Though only I survived in the end. Hansu, who was reminiscing the old days, remembered Keldian's words. Keldian firmly told him while handing down the combination methods. Hansu, who had thought up to this point, stole a glance at the three who were watching fervently but shook his head. They won't know even if they see. Since if you didn't know the correct ratio and the heating time perfectly, then it will be useless. Hansu emptied a nearby shampoo container, filled it with the liquid he created, then applied it to his sword by squeezing the container. Is there a possibility that we can use that too? Hansu nodded as Mihi carefully asked. Of course. And then everyone's face brightened up. If there wasn't Hansu's words following it up. One application costs either a half strength or stamina rune. Isn't that a bit too petty? Taesoon made an annoyed expression. Hansu shrugged his shoulders. I could just give it to you if I wanted. But if you look at it on the long term, it doesn't seem like a good choice. Mihi nodded after thinking about it for a moment. A one-way relationship will eventually get ruined. And Hansu seemed like a good person to know for long term, or at least he did so far. I will give it to you later. Let me put it on first. Hansu nodded at those words. What about you guys? Sangjin and Taesoon nodded eventually without a choice. Since we don't have to give him anything if it isn't that good. Or just not use it. The two thought as they presented their swords. Careful when you put it on, since there will be severe pain if it gets on your fingers. And at those words the people who were squeezing the shampoo bottles applied the poison carefully. Hansu added something whilst staring into the giant bag latched onto their backs. If you walk around outside with such a big bag then you will realize why a lure is effective in fishing. If you want to complete it safely then do it like this. You can't fight with that on anyways. Hansu gathered a bunch of things then went into a corner where light didn't reach, digged a hole then buried it. Since they had enhanced bodies and swords, digging in the ground was very swift. Taesoon and Sangjin, who had seen this, started to gather every food item and started to put them into a large bag. Then Hansu shook his head as he saw this. If those all disappear, the guys who come here later will chase us with their lives. Leave some. The two who looked at Hansu with an unsatisfied face, started to gather necessities first. Mihi was checking out Hansu thoroughly from afar. I thought he was only quiet. He wasn't only good at fighting. Every single action was extremely trustworthy. Like a professional survivalist. Won't a psychic power like that appear for me? It was weird that he had used the excuse of psychic powers since the beginning, but in a world where beasts something like psychic powers seemed possible. Mihi shook her head after looking at Hansu in a strange way. She was quick to catch on ever since she was small. There were countless millions of people who had gone missing but not one had come back. Which meant it was likely that they were going to spend eternity in this place. And for that she had to adapt to this place fast. I definitely don't want to die. No, maybe dying was a better alternative in some situations. If nothing works. This wasn't the time to look for a man to protect her, but a final method was always important. Mihi looked at Hansu with a strange look then followed Hansu, who had gotten out of his seat and proceeded to go deeper into the station, while clenching her teeth. Taesoon kept on asking Hansu as he saw him walk through the darkness. Is there a way for us to get that psychic power too? At those words Mihi, who had been staring at Hansu, and even Sangjin, who had been following quietly, listened in. Hansu nodded at Taesoon's words. Maybe. Really. Hansu's knowledge of his own future was not psychic powers, but a few people who come in the other world show special skills that they didn't have in the real world. This was called. Chaldean gave an explanation about traits this way. People who had a very good personal trait showed a faster rate of growth than others if they survived the start. His case was a trait called 7 stars. A large variety of traits existed and very dangerous traits existed among those as well. I need to find those guys though. Taesoon asked with a weird face at Hansu. Why did you get quieter all of a sudden? He didn't really talk about, but he talked even less now. Hansu replied very simply. There aren't many things to talk about. Hansu thought of the annihilation of mankind as he answered. Everyone was at a dried up state without a moment to talk for the last 5 years. As you have opponents such as the tribes of Abyss who seem to flood you like water, hope had started to slowly disappear. And thanks to that a person to talk to rapidly decreased. How could he? Taesoon clicked his tongue. Was he a loner during high school? Is that why he learned martial arts? Well, whatever happens as long as there's possibility for him. Taesoon, who had always been in the center of the crowd, and who was now in a 2-man position wasn't really used to it. And it wasn't pleasing either. A guy like him develops psychic abilities and can do that much, if it appeared on me I'd shine even more. And when that happens he will become the center of the crowd again. Since that guy Hansu is useful, I should keep him by my side. Taesoon walked forward with hope-filled thoughts. Chapter 7 Gangnam Station, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Wait a moment. What is it? Taesoon, who was already annoyed due to Hansu's slow movement while he checked the walls and the ground carefully, replied bluntly. Hansu ignored Taesoon and searched the surrounding ground. Monsters are living beings too. They were dragged along with them into this world, but their life habits or markings existed. As Hansu checked the ground, he found a mark that looked like something had been dragged across the floor. In the tutorial area, the monsters that drag their body across the floor are 17 kinds. Plus, if you take into account the mucus, then it is reduced to 3 kinds. It isn't the black snail. A unique sour smell was not in the air, and the markings are only on the ground. If it was the black snail, you would see the mucus on the walls as well. It isn't chopped up zombies either. Because then the markings on the ground would be half mucus and half intestines. Then only one choice remains. Land mermaid. Land mermaid. This is actually more like a nickname. Their upper body was a unique shaped human and their lower body was like a grub. From one angle it would look like a mermaid that had been dropped onto the land. To drag their heavy lower body across the floor with their hands, the strength of their hands was very developed and the paralyzing poison that came out of their lower body was dangerous. Their lower body was heavy and the speed of dragging themselves across the floor was only slightly faster than walking, but if you aren't ready and get shot by the paralysis poison, you will witness the sight of your body getting ripped apart by these guys. Hansu made an unsightly face after seeing the overall state. This is a tutorial area with a high difficulty. If every tutorial area's monsters were different, then their difficulties were different as well. It's not an opponent that you cannot win against, but it was indeed a problem to deal with. The goblin and the green worm are similar in terms of physical ability and aren't that bad when dealing face to face, but the consequences could be dire if you don't know about them. And because it's the first day newbie adventurers, not knowing was definite. When he had first come here, the tutorial stage ended before he came to the train station, so he didn't know, but it was set up with rather troublesome mobs. I guess I need a little more preparation. Hansu stopped and then returned back to the convenience store. The 3 who had been following mumbled quietly. It is that psychic power again. You guys come and help too. Hansu returned, gathered all the soju, Korean alcoholic beverage, flipped them upside down and started to empty them. Glug 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 glug, they did say it would be here. But why is something like this here? He did heard it from the team he made the plans with, but after seeing the paint thinner in the corner, Hansu smirked and laughed. *TL. Paint thinner is extremely flammable and explosive. After he emptied the soju bottles, he filled them with the paint thinner. Is there no diesel around? Hansu just replaced it with a cheaper version and poured some of the sesame oil in the corner, then plugged the top with tissue. Where did you learn how to make a Molotov cocktail? If you live in Korea, you should at least know this much. We need to make as much as available. When the 4 made it together, it was done quickly. Hansu got the lighters from the side of the counter, handed them one each, then gathered the Molotovs in 2 backpacks and another bag and talked to the 3. One will throw the Molotov and the 3 will stand in the front. The rune displacement will be less for the person on the back who is on the safer location. Anybody up for it? Taesoon, who heard that the rune displacement was low, stood without words, but Sangjin and Mihi raised their hands slowly. Hansu looked at the 2 and spoke. Get into a consensus, as to who will throw. Sangjin knitted his brows for a moment, but since he couldn't bicker with the beauty, he was about to lower his hand. When Mihi was about to make a sigh of relief, Hansu threw out another word as a bonus. As a reminder, it will become much more dangerous from now on. Instead of saying let's trade during the fight, decide carefully now. At those words, Sangjin, who was about to lower his hands, stopped, and Mihi looked at Hansu with a resentful face. Mihi looked at Sangjin with a desperate face, but when Sangjin had no looks of backing down, she just gave up. Let's take turns with it. All right. Sangjin thought for a moment, but since he didn't want to bicker around, he agreed with those terms. Should I just go up? Sangjin pondered for a moment after hearing that it was dangerous, but then shook his head. It felt like if you followed Hansu something amazing will come out. He also wanted to be part of that. It seems like he shares it fairly so. If he lent a hand, would they throw him out? He did say it was dangerous, but he could easily run from the Molotov throwing position in case of danger. Sangjin gulped his saliva, then slowly headed into the darkness. Kuduk, walk. Throw it. Throw it this way. Taesoon screamed as he saw the monster crawling towards him over the stones. Hansu's poison was very strong. Even if they were scratched they would still turn and twist around their bodies. It definitely was worth paying runes for it. But the problem sprang out somewhere else. Whilst fighting joyfully, a paralysis poison sketched by his leg. Taesoon had already been shot in one of his legs, so his movements were not completely free. Goddamn. I fell for it even though I knew about it. Even though Hansu had gone out to the front and showed how they spat it out, but since the look of them crawling over the ground was funny, he was caught off guard. Thankfully the location he got shot didn't melt or anything, but the mobs who spread out their long arms and approached in strides were fear itself. Them, who had looked slow before, are now almost like grim reapers. Wah! Sangjin, who had been fumbling around, barely lit the fire, then threw it towards the location where the land mermaids were gathering. Choong! As the Molotov exploded, pieces of flame scattered everywhere. Kiik! As their skin dried up, they twisted their bodies as if it was painful. Kudududuk, and at that moment Hansu ran around between the land mermaids and smashed the heads. Since the edge was dulled it didn't cut well, but when the padao was swinged with enhanced strength, it had no problem getting through the skin and muscle. One strike, one kill. Honestly, it didn't matter if they didn't die in one strike. The poison on the blade stimulated their nerves and gave them insane amounts of pain. The land mermaids still shot out paralysis poison and stretched out their arms, but Hansu dodged most of it and the rest he deflected with a piece of goblin leather. Does that guy have eyes on the back of his head? Taesoon spun his tongue around as he looked at Hansu. As Hansu finished them off and all the enemies disappeared, they finally sat on the ground as if the tension was released. Hua! Wawa, rest a while then bring the runes. Taesoon walked towards Hansu, who was distributing the runes, though he was tired. At first he was suspicious that he would cheat them, but as he perfectly distributed them he stopped worrying. As if he was looking at the whole warfield the whole time, he knew exactly how many one killed and how much one contributed. Goddamn, it isn't much. After getting shot by the paralysis shot, he fought while dragging his foot, so the amount of runes he acquired was much less in comparison to the floor above. Fuck. The physical difference between us is increasing. The one who killed takes the runes. But the combination of the kills of the three was not even a quarter of what Hansu killed. And thanks to that the speed at which he hunted increased more and more. As Hansu's physical stats rose, it was like he cast off iron chains and was flying around. Fucktard. When Taesoon felt something boiling up from this chest, he looked at Sangjin and then shouted at him in anger. Sangjin couldn't even throw a Molotov properly because he got scared by a land mermaid that was walking towards him. Even though he was a friend, since he couldn't even do that properly while they fought with their lives on the line, Taesoon's anger exploded. You. As Sangjin made a sorry expression, Hansu spoke while looking at Sangjin. Come and take the runes. The recovery will be faster after you raise the stamina, and after Hansu concluded his words, he started to cut the belly of the land mermaids. Let's see. If you open the area between their rear end and the belly button. It's here. Hansu took out the paralysis poison sac from between the slit of the stomach, carefully shrouded with goblin leather, then started to carefully squeeze it out as if he was making medicine, and poured it into an empty shampoo container he brought. Though it wasn't useful against the land mermaids, it was definitely useful against the life forms of the third floor. Taesoon then looked at his and Sangjin's runes by Hansu's side. If I take those runes too, I can somewhat catch up. Taesoon's eyes shone as he screamed and marched on. Why would you give it to a bitch like him? It's better for me to take it and fight. A sword stopped his way when he stomped towards the runes in anger. Are you really going to be like this? The distribution must be fair. You're not supposed to touch the food line. *TL. Food line equals a way for someone to survive. At those words Sang Jin, who had been trembling in the back, slowly came to the front and took the runes that were considered his. Mihi, who was sighing, asked Hansu cautiously. Isn't it annoying or anything? Though they were fighting zealously, but to Hansu it was probably frustrating to no end, but he did not get angry a single time and kept on heading down steadily. Hansu merely shrugged his shoulders. If it's this much it could be considered gentlemanly. Normal college students. They didn't even go to the military. Half were female. And they were dragged here with no form of preparation. Will it make sense to fight like a special forces warrior on the first day here against monsters who want to rip them apart? To those who were living a normal life before, that was a normal reaction. If it wasn't such a dire situation like this they would have never thought of holding a sword. Well, I was crazy in the past, so. Even if he knew that he could only learn 7 skills he would have still learned Dororo Lizard's essence. Because he was not in a situation where he could afford to not learn it. The days where he ran around barely holding onto his lifeline after learning a lizard essence were still remembered by him. Hansu, who had finished his thoughts, looked at the 3 in front of him. Hansu didn't have any plans about saying anything about things they couldn't do. As he lived through the abyss life, he found out that the ones that latched onto your ankles in the end were not the ones who were scared or weak near the beginning. Rather it was the ones that were fearless and strong that made problems. It doesn't matter if they can't do it, as long as they have a limit to what they can't do. You aren't abandoning us, right? Mihi watched Hansu with teary eyes, and at those words Sangjin and Taesoon both jerked. Because they felt it through their body. The only reason they can remain friends and talk leisurely like this was due to Hansu. Then Hansu smirked. It seems like they've got the wrong idea. He never took them in, so what would he be abandoning? You 3 are doing well enough, so don't worry. Since we've rested somewhat, let's continue forward. These were not empty words, the 3 were not at the level of grabbing onto ankles. Even if Hansu fought alone the speed would have been around the same. From another point of view he was able to move about more freely because the 3 took away some of the attention. If the number of monsters were limited it would be different. The only thing that they weren't short of were monsters, and the important thing was how many runes you took in the limited time. Let's see. Hansu checked his stats as he picked up his runes. Kong Hansu, Strength. 25.3 Stamina. 24.5 Agility. 14.1 Perception. 15.2 As I expected, though it was random, you couldn't ignore the specialties of the entity. The land mermaids had high strength and stamina. It seemed like he had gained a lot of strength and stamina in a short amount of time. It isn't bad, rather strength and stamina were more important right now. Agility and perception runes had a good effect, but he can replace them with battle skills and experience. But on the other hand, the strength to get through the armor and the stamina that helped with healing and the duration of how long one swings their sword was more important during the fight. And another thing, Hansu moved his hands towards the last stamina rune on the ground anxiously. And that moment Hansu's stamina rose from 24.5 to 24.8. It's above 50. The moment the addition of strength and stamina rose above 50, the air suddenly stretched apart. And at the same time a familiar yet unsightly face came out. A mission has been given. Hansu smiled at the fairy that had appeared in front of his eyes. Chapter 8. Gangnam Station 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There's an adventurer who has gotten over 51st. Wow. The fairy came out of thin air and clapped with its tiny hands. The 3 who were standing behind Hansu just watched this scene in a daze. Taesoon, who was in a daze, asked the fairy. What do you mean 50? At those words the fairy smiled and answered. It means that the basic strength and stamina combined have gone over 50. And then the fairy flew onto Hansu's shoulder. We always like a person who is active and outgoing. And for that we prepare a small reward to the most active and outgoing person. Wait. Isn't it a little unfair then? Mihi opened her mouth. Mihi was a female. Because she exercised and kept her body in shape, her strength and stamina were 8, it wasn't a bad start for a female, but against males it would get pushed away. Mihi was dissatisfied but asked quietly and tried to show the least amount of disrespect. Since she had seen that cute fairy rip out the heart of a person. You don't need to be that careful. We don't kill once we start. We don't kill on a whim. And to answer the question. It is supposed to be unfair. Life is. While Mihi was flustered, the fairy kept talking. This isn't some sort of game. Why do you find fairness? Do you think you can just go out because there isn't a balance patch? You were probably also a part of the unfair faces in your world. But then you didn't change your face to lower yourself to the average, right? At the fairy's bitter words Mihi clenched her teeth and backed off. The fairy ignored Mihi and opened her mouth while looking at Hansu. Since you were the first one to go over the combination stat, I will reward you. Hansu knew what the reward was. 3 of any rune. It was a reward to the first person who had gone over the combination score of 50 out of the 100 in the tutorial stage. But to be honest, Hansu didn't really have high expectations for this mission. If you satisfy a special requirement, then a reward is given. From a point of view it is similar to a game, but the damnable part is that this mission thing isn't really set already. It was like there was a bank full of problems and the fairy would pick a few then started the tutorial. He brought the mission list with 119 missions created through people's experiences, but he didn't know which mission would have came out. And this mission was vastly in favor for the person who had a different starting point. The muscular man he had seen probably had at least around 33.4 of strength and vitality combined at the start. But on the other hand he started at 20. He didn't expect much, but maybe due to his fast progress or something he luckily received it. And among the 119 missions this mission had quite a nice reward. Tell me 3 of any rune that you want. As I expected, 3 of a stat rune is a large reward if it's a large and is a small reward if it's small. 3 strength runes could be gathered with a little bit of effort, but 3 agility runes are hard to acquire as well as giving much more assistance. But what he wanted was a different rune. Is it agility or perception as I expected? What about regeneration rune? It's a consumable, but if you take this then you can even heal a hole in your belly. A normal poison will disappear. Having limbs being cut is a bit far-fetched, but isn't it amazing? At those words the ones who reacted were the 3. If you receive the 3 regeneration runes, then wouldn't it be getting 3 more lives? And Hansu might even give it to them. He won't leave us to die, right? But Hansu betrayed everyone's expectations and spoke of a different rune from his mouth. Do you perhaps have a rune to resist magic? At those words the fairy made a slightly shocked face, then smiled as it spoke. Of course it exists. And the fairy pushed its hand into the void without words, then pulled out 3 peculiar-looking runes. As I thought, it doesn't really care much. It worked. Basically all these fairies wanted was things to go in an amusing way, so they didn't really ask much no matter how much you plan things. And Hansu, who had gotten much more comfortable, laughed inwardly. Magic resistance rune. Regeneration rune is indeed good, but one could obtain it pretty soon. But on the other hand, physical resistance runes and magical resistance runes are not something you can acquire in the tutorial stage. No, Kongtae said it came out of a random mob, but then he is an exception since he is a seriously special case. It's really some crazy luck. Magic resistance runes are very important. There is no such thing as a health point in this world, so one fatal strike meant you were gone. It wasn't like a game where if you got hit for 100 damage 10 times you would lose 1000 and die. Increasing vitality meant your recovery speed and activeness rose and not tankiness like in the games. And for that physical resistance and magic resistance were more important than anything else. Just because you used these 2 runes didn't mean your skin got tougher or get covered with scales or anything. It had a more essential solution. The 2 runes, after controlling their numbers, reduced the incoming attack itself. This is similar to a game's defense or resistance. As Hansu ate the runes, his stats were altered. Kong Hansu, Strength. 25.3 Vitality. 24.8 Agility. 14.1 Perception. 15.2 Magic Resistance. 13 Magic Resistance, which was fixed at 10 from the start and had no reason to be displayed, showed up as it increased by 3. Hu Dadong, as his surroundings lashed about, he could feel the laws which were applied to his body getting twisted a little. Good. With this I gain resistance to skills. He pondered between physical and magic resistance, but in the end magic resistance is the best. To be honest, in the tutorial area most attacks were physical if you take into account for the attacks you would receive. But physical defense can be filled in to an extent with his experience and battle skills, but on the other hand magic attacks with a wide range of attack and a few vicious skills couldn't be dodged once they were cast. There isn't a beast or human who would use magic with the normal tutorial difficulty, but the place he was challenging were the dungeons with hidden pieces. Of course it wasn't something that lets you get hit 3 times and survive instead of getting hit once and being gone. Just reducing the damage to an extent. But there is a huge difference between getting killed on the first strike and surviving to land another slash of a sword. Since regeneration runes are only able to be utilized if you were alive. This will be of great help to his progress. The fairy looked at that Hansu and then smiled widely. I have high expectations. Please continue to do well. The fairy, who had finished talking, disappeared into the void. Hansu turned around and talked as he walked. Let's go. But why are your expressions like that? It seems like you miss something. It's nothing. It felt like 3 regeneration runes had disappeared right in front of their eyes, but no matter how shameless someone was they couldn't say it, so they just made pitiful faces as they walked behind Hansu. Kudududuk, it's now the 3rd floor. Hansu, who had gotten rid of all the land mermaids, mumbled as he looked at the creepy entrance in the distance. But Taesoon, who had been looking at him, spoke out. But it seems your movements have remained the same since back then. Hansu nodded at Taesoon's words. He has some keen perception. Hansu showed him his right wrist. All the runes Hansu took were gathered just like that on there. This can also be gathered like this. Really? Well, if consumable runes existed, a mechanism like this should exist. But how do you do it? But then he realized that it wasn't that hard. He thought, I should gather them, and the moment he moved his hands the runes that had been getting absorbed into his body turned into a small dot-like symbol on his wrist. Hansu looked at Taesoon and spoke. It's not something that's very good. Why? Hansu answered as Taesoon asked. First, it reduces your hunting speed. If your stats are high, then hunting would naturally be faster. Since you could get the gathered runes and raise your stats instantly in case where you feel like you would get pushed back, but there are holes in the strategy. The second reason is the important one. If you die from a sneak attack while doing this, then all these runes get puked out. The runes. Yeah. Usually when one died, the rune that came out was only a tiny part of what they had acquired, and the dropped rune was also random. You could block a sneak attack, but dying at the hands of somebody with similar hands was not a hard task. And especially during the beginning where one doesn't have physical and magic resistances. If you aren't focused, then you are gone just like that, and even if it wasn't a sneak attack, something like, which is an attack skill you can acquire at the tutorial area, would send you off. Walking around with a lot of runes on your wrist was basically walking between bandits with the body to buy weapons and armor on your back. Then why do you gather them? Hansu gave a short reply to Songjin's question. Because we can trade with each other. After the tutorial there exists currency which the adventurers had created. The 9 strongest clans created by the existing people, the common currency created through the agreements from 2 neutral clans of the and. The runes were of too high value so using them wasn't suitable as currency. But in the tutorial area where adventurers couldn't get into runes could be used as currency to some extent. 2 of the people who cleared this hidden piece told him. As far he knew that mission was the only mission of a first.com type mission in the first tutorial area so there was no need to keep raising his stats vigilantly. If he was in a perilous situation while fighting he could just simply use the runes and there shouldn't exist anybody who could kill him anyway. In this case he could just gather the runes and trade if he was lacking then just simply wear the artifacts. At those words Taesoon and the others started to gather tunes. Hansu who had seen them gather runes on their wrist shook his head. You guys can't. Just use them as you get them. Are you looking down on us right now? As Taesoon suddenly asked Hansu, Hansu clicked his tongue. As I see it he wants to get those runes and trade them to raise perception or agility. If your perception or agility rises then you become better at evading so you receive less injuries. Probably from their situation they want to go towards the path where they receive less injuries. But how you get rid of the enemies is dependent upon how hard, and how many times you swing the sword. If you lack stamina or strength then you will fall before you can get rid of the enemy. He had no reason to suffer a sneak attack. He had a lot of experience and intelligence. He was confident physically as well. The techniques were fundamentally different so he could save runes and fight at ease with the remaining strength and vitality. Taesoon, Songjin and Mihi were not at that level yet. And they were in front of the 3rd floor. They didn't know which monsters were protecting the train but it was definitely going to be dangerous. But Hansu just shrugged. Well if they go down and get wrecked they will wake up. There was no need for 100 words. If you get hit by a monster once and scream out you will automatically touch your wrist. He who had been fighting against the crazy monarch slaves or the demons of the abyss but came back to the past, to him this much was almost cute. Just maintain around that pace. Well do whatever you want. Let's go down then. Are all 3 of you going again? The 3 who had been watching Hansu pondered at Hansu's words. The 2nd floor was definitely hard. But we got stronger. And it was only hard at the start and we got used to it after. The 3 made their decisions and nodded. And if they kept fighting wouldn't they get something like a mission as well? They aren't really much in comparison to Hansu but they are still better off than the people above. And we've come this far, we cannot let him go alone. If there's something good, they should share it. The 3 who had decided followed Hansu just like that to the 3rd floor. Chapter 9. Gangnam Station, 5, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Hansu who had entered the 3rd floor nodded at the light in the distance. A corridor that stretched far. In the space their darkness was best suited for, a stationary train made hissing sounds as it shone its lights in the distance. And because of that Hansu didn't need to search in order to find out what lived in this place. There was a snake that shined silver in front of the train sleeping in a curled up position. Barb snake being soft and squishy, its main diet was normal animals but it also ate deuterium metals as a secondary source of food. The deuterium metal that is digested within its stomach gets fused with the special liquid released inside its body and gets excreted between the scales. And this mixture dries in the air to cover the scales on its body. This guy is pretty fast. The slippery and hard scales combined with its speed makes it hard to catch. Hansu looked at his pedao that had its edge almost dulled out. It was a good pedao out of the ones that came out of goblins and that was the reason why it survived until now but it was quite lacking to go against those. It might be a little hard with this. Paralysis poison is only effective if the blade gets through. The weight and hardness are important but first you need a sharp edge. Taesoon, who had a kitchen knife on his waist, backed off after seeing Hansu's look along with Sang-jin who also had them. Hansu clicked his tongue as he watched Taesoon and Sang-jin. These guys need to go through some more socialization process. Try giving them to me. One isn't enough. They will likely break during the fight. At Hansu's words, Sang-jin looked at him with a slightly dissatisfied expression. You have yours. At those words, Hansu looked at Sang-jin with an amused look. It seems like this guy has the same idea. Hansu looked at Sang-jin and Taesoon and spoke. Are you guys trying to fight that? If they were to fight, he had no intention of asking them for their knives. He wasn't in a hurry and there were probably a few left in the convenience store, he could just go back and get some. But unexpectedly they wanted to fight even though he thought that they would say they wouldn't want to. At that moment Hansu looked at what they could see and knew what these three were thinking. Are they looking down on that thing? The barbed snake was not really a large snake. Its length was only about 3 meters. The length was long but its body was smaller than the land mermaid. The land mermaid's length was about 2 meters but it had a lower body that resembled a grub and these looked more agile. From a point of view they don't really look formidable. But you can't assume things like that. This guy was more dangerous than all of the land mermaids above combined. Hard scales and fast speed. Along with the strong muscles that can crush the land mermaid as well as sharp fangs and grip strength that do not fit snakes. The barbed snake was a predator that chewed upon land mermaids. And it was also smart, so it went for the weaker ones first. If these guys were to attack, then they would get murdered. It won't be a case where they will cry after getting hit once then absorb their gathered runes, instead their limbs will fall off. How do I handle these guys? There should be a different situation where you should have greed for runes. He had seen these types a lot. Something that always happened during group hunts. They will forcibly join the hunt and try to receive some of the distributed goods. Ares was really good at persuading, but he wasn't really interested in persuasion. It was annoying too. Normally Ares would persuade, Chaldean would threaten and control them with carrots and whips. If a negotiation failed to bloom, then Kongtae would walk out to force them off. And if that failed to clean things up, he went out. There was no need to see blood for these. Fun was fun and work was work. He was annoyed with dealing with kids that were a fourth of his age, so he gave them 2 options. I will give you options. First, I will get out and you fight them yourselves. Second, you guys get out and watch me fight alone. How do you want to do it? Taesoon got angry at the suddenly different attitude from Hansu. This bitch, we were hunting well together so far, but why is he suddenly like this? What his psychic powers were couldn't be grasped by him, but his reaction told him that what the snakes dropped was rather good. If they fought together and shared the drops it would be good, but why did he need to get greedy to the point of excluding them? When Taesoon was about to say something, somebody quickly made their decision and spoke. I'll get out. What? The one who had made the decision was not Mihi but Sang-jin. Taesoon, who had been looking at Sang-jin with a flustered expression, scowled as he spoke. Hey! He's being petty and leave us friends out to eat them all by himself. Friend. It's a good word. He didn't decide to bicker over it, although his idea was that good things were shared together and hardships were gone through together, but it seemed like Taesoon was using it in a slightly different way. I told you to follow me. I never said I was going to take you. At those words Taesoon looked at Hansu with a dissatisfied expression. And Mihi, who had been listening, spoke as she nodded. Let's stop. If Hansu is talking like that, then it means it's really dangerous. If he wanted to take everything, then he would have beaten them down, then taken all the runes. Even when Taesoon was in danger after he got shot by the paralysis poison from the land mermaids, Hansu didn't talk like that. From the way Hansu was acting right now meant that those scrubby-looking snakes were actually very dangerous. No, since there was only one monster on the whole 3rd floor, there was no way that thing was not strong. They had forgotten that for a moment due to greed. Taesoon, who had started to come to his senses, calmed down, then started to take out the knives by in waist while clenching his teeth. 6 of them. Hansu started to apply the poison from the land mermaid on the edge of the kitchen knives from Taesoon and Sangjin. Though that thing ate land mermaids, it was only because it was all digested within its stomach that could even digest deuterium. The land mermaid's poison, which was almost like a neurotoxin, had to get into its muscles to work. Hansu, who had numerous knives dangling from his waist, spoke as he looked at the 3. Hunt the land mermaids above. Hunting should be done constantly. Taesoon looked at that Hansu and answered expressionlessly. Didn't you bring us along to take us all the way? Taesoon grinded his teeth because he felt like they were used. Hansu smirked at those words. How did I not remember these amusing friends? He remembered clearly that they followed him in here, but it had changed to him bringing them here. You should really be lucky that Keldian didn't come here. Ah, Keldian didn't start here anyway. Hansu thought of Keldian, who was probably wandering around the purple region, and laughed. If it was Keldian, he would have made everyone above fall into a trap and take all there then started. And because of that he was pushed out of returning here. He's always progressing forward, but the results aren't the best. Hansu looked at Taesoon and spoke as he thought of Keldian. Go stay above. If you aren't lucky then your eardrums will pop. And then Hansu charged at the barbed snake. Ki-eek. And then a frightening scream was heard, and the 3 who had been going back up realized at once why Hansu told them to stay out. Kayak. The barbed snake's whole body squirmed as it expanded out, then compressed in an instant. And the air that was expanded and compressed exploded out of the barbed snake's mouth with an incredible speed. Paang, an attack that had slight amounts of magic. The power wasn't that great, but it was a shockwave that had an impact that shook the opponent's balance by destroying their eardrums and cochlea. Yuk. The body of the 3, who had been standing by the stairs, swayed for a moment by the impact force that rang throughout the 3rd floor. But Hansu already expected that attack after seeing its stomach and neck area. Good, the impact came through the hands that had been covering the ears. But the magic resistance came into play and reduced the damage. Hansu, who had succeeded in not losing his balance, quickly moved his hands from his ears and quickly attacked its momentarily defenseless body. To be precise, the scales were hard, but in between the scales there had to exist a gap from which the melted deuterium mixture came out. The knife with paralysis poison applied to it went in between the scales. Kayak. Good. 3 have been inserted. There were 5 major spinal nerves throughout its body that controlled its body. Hansu, who had touched the nerve after getting between the scales and its ribs, quickly backed off. Kayak. The barbed snake, who was decorated with 3 knives within its body, twisted its body while making clattering sounds with its scales as if its body was harder to move than before. As expected, poison is the best in the beginning. The beasts and clans in the later stages had incredible amounts of resistance and regeneration, so most poisons basically had no effect on them. And if they also use skills it gets even harder. But poison was one of the extremely effective methods against the monsters in the beginning whose body were smaller and had less resistance. Even him, if he didn't have the paralysis poison, would have struggled a lot. Well. It's easy now. He was bitten on his arm when he first inserted the knife, but due to him raising his vitality the wound would heal. Hansu charged again to insert 2 more knives into its body, then finished it off by stabbing deeply within the roof of its mouth with the last remaining knife. Hansu made a weird sound as he looked at the skill rune dropped by it. The skill rune which shone next to a few stat runes. Barbed snake's shockwave. To use this thing he needed mana, so he couldn't use it yet. But in the case where he gained a mana rune during the tutorial, it would be an effective tactic in the beginning. Well, the visualization of it coming out of the body was not great, but as long as it was effective. As I expected. Due to it being a rather strong mob, the rewards are And the three who had been standing afar off slowly crawled up and spoke out after seeing the skill rune on the ground. Are you going to use this, Hansu? Taesoon mumbled with a jealous-filled expression while looking at Hansu. Because the already strong guy would get a skill rune, so now he would start flying around. Damn it, at those words Hansu shook his head. I'm not going to use it. He could only use 7, so why would he use something like that? What? Sangjin stood up and shouted. Then can I use this? If he wasn't going to sell it, didn't it mean he would give it to them? Taesoon scowled at Sangjin's shout and spoke. What would you do with it? It'd be better if I... What are you guys talking about? I'm going to sell it, huh? I'm selling it. To the person who brings the most runes. If you buy it now, I will give a discount. 5%. Hansu shook the runes within his wrist and laughed. Can't we do an installment plan? If you guarantee it. Stand together. From his expression, if one person were to ditch, then the guarantees would have to sell all their gear to pay him back. The three made an expression as if they had chewed on crap. Chapter 10. Gangnam Station, 6, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Have you decided? Whilst Hansu went to the convenience store to get something, he gave some time to the three of them to decide. And then Mihi nodded her head. Well. They probably know. You can realize just from Taesoon's situation. Stats were important, but skills were also very important. If that skill went into somebody up there, then the gap they created through diligent hunting could be crushed in an instant. And to prevent that, a trustworthy person of the three would purchase the skill. In conclusion, gathering up the runes has been beneficial. The runes that one person has is rather lacking to buy it, but it could easily be solved by lending. Hansu asked while chuckling. Whom was it decided to be given to? At those words Mihi answered. It's me. As I expected. He guessed somewhat to this extent. Since Hansu saw Mihi pick up a mana rune earlier. No one was there to bicker who killed it, so from her taking it quietly, it seemed like she wanted to hide it. Well, the more hidden cards you have, the better. Whatever happens, that skill required mana. And because of that, for Sangjin and Taesoon, who had no mana, it'd be rather burdensome for them to invest in the skill rune. Since they would never know when a mana rune would come out. But Mihi had already gained mana runes and already confirmed that mana runes can drop from hunting. And from her situation where she had already confirmed the performance of the skill, it would have been very enticing. And the remaining two probably felt safer giving it to Mihi than giving it to others. Mihi borrowed the runes from Sangjin and Taesoon while shaking their hands, and then approached Hansu. Good. Here they are. There are 3 each for agility and perception and 7 each for stamina and strength. Since I said I'll give a 5% discount, I will only take 6 strength. You're quite thorough. Mihi looked at him with a slightly resentful expression. With that many stats you could really become strong. She had fought a few times, but you can tell instantly. Not having runes is getting closer to death. Ecchi, though she had gotten a skill, she seemed to have felt a little regret. And Hansu looked at Mihi's expression and chuckled. Don't think that it's too much. If you get into the habit of getting free things around here, you will die quickly. There is no trade in this world that does not cost in some way. Whilst chasing costless things, the cost will have stacked somewhere else and will explode. It wasn't somewhere like a mart's food sample corners where no one would say anything if you eat and run away. Let's see, since the barbed snake was dead and the trade was complete, there was something he had to finish here. Hansu started to look around the train station. The existence of a barbed snake means there is deuterium ore nearby, and indeed there was a few orange ores that sprouted out like crystals near the train station. Hansu grabbed them with his hands and rooted them out. Tududuk, it was very elastic. Despite it being a metal, it felt like pulling rubber. Hansu started to mold the deuterium with his hands. And the 3 stared at Hansu. Spike. Needle. Taesoon stared at the deuterium metal that was being molded like clay enthusiastically. Hansu left the needle that was molded to about 20 centimeters in the corner, went up to the barbed snake, ripped off the scales and started to rip its stomach open. Shook, it's here. Hansu made a delighted expression as he saw that the lysate solution sources hadn't dried up. Hansu took out all 6 of the lysate solution sources, then set up the burner and the pot and started to squeeze them above the pot. Plop 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 plop, and soon the pot was filled with a green liquid. And when the liquid started to boil, he started to break apart the scales of the barbed snake and started to throw them in. The hardness of the scales on barbed snake's skin was extremely powerful, but it wasn't to the point where you couldn't break it. It's not good enough for a weapon. So he had to make a new one. In the same way the barbed snake made his scales. Shockingly, when the hard scales entered the boiling lysate liquid, they all melted down. And Hansu, who had seen the green liquid slowly turn silvery, plopped down the deuterium metal he made once it turned completely silver. And soon a change occurred. Korororek. The deuterium metal, which did not exceed 20 centimeters and barely entered the pot, started to absorb the liquid aggressively. The needle, which had an orange tint, started to change its color very quickly as it absorbed the liquid. And soon the size increased gradually as well. The needle, which hadn't reached 20 centimeters before, was already over 1 meter long and the width was as thick as a thumb. The end is a little blunt. He molded with all his might, but due to it being hand-molded as well as the enlarging process, the tip was a little blunt. Hansu held the needle with all his strength and started to grind it with the dull pedal. Kududak. Kududak. A hardness that barely peeled off when Hansu used all his strength while sweating intensely. Yeah. It should at least be that hard. Hansu made a satisfied expression as he was working very hard to grind it. As I expected, you guys are the best when I'm against strong opponents. If his attacks went into the enemy easily, then cutting parts would be good, but once you go against mobs that have decent amounts of physical resistance, cutting attacks don't work well. If one was confident in fighting up close, then rather than long swords that cut, needles and daggers that stab are much better in going through the enemy's defenses. While the area of damage is small and secondary damages such as bleeding is hard, if you know the weak points of the enemy and have the confidence to stab the weak point accurately, then the needle is the best. And if I need to go through his defenses when fighting him, it should at least be this much. Hansu thought of the opponent he needed to go against in order to obtain one of the 2 hidden pieces in the first tutorial area. Number 11 out of 134 weapons that can be created with the materials gained from the monsters in the first tutorial area. If you think about, the alchemists went through a lot of trouble for a long time in order to create the best quality weapons out of the low quality materials that you gain in the tutorial area, it should at least be this much. If a Rococo lizard or carnivorous sac came out, then he could create an even stronger 1.17 or 1.96, but barbed snake wasn't bad at all. It would be rather hard obtaining a better weapon in the tutorial area than this. I should conclude now. Hansu, who had grinded the edge to a sharp point, took out the goblin leather he had saved, cut it into a long piece and then applied the poison weakly onto it. Chiik Hansu nodded as he saw the insides of the leather melt slightly and then wrapped the leather around the handle area of the needle. As he felt the right feeling of a grip in his hands, he made a satisfactory expression as he stabbed into the air. When he uses it later, he could apply poison or paralysis poison depending on his preference then. Can't we buy that? Taesoon looked at Hansu's weapon with a greedy expression. If it's that much, then he was willing to buy it with runes. If Hansu struggled that hard to make it, then its hardness was incredible. As he was dissatisfied with the blades that went dull from a few strikes ever since a while ago, it could only be tempting to Taesoon. And then Hansu shook his head. From the start, you guys cannot use this unless you were high rankers. Since the area of damage is extremely small. And something like this would be especially hard for you guys to use. Well, to be honest, it would depend on the user, so I would sell it. Despite that, he couldn't make more. I cannot make more because I used all the lysate solution. Tisk, Tae-soon looked at the bottom of the empty bot and clicked his tongue. Hansu left them like that and moved inside the train. So if I get on this then this should move, he just needed to get on the train and go receive the reward. The battle was over. The barbed snake was already strong enough, but if an even stronger boss came out after getting on the train, how would a first-day adventurer kill it? Hidden piece just means it's a hidden mission and not an impossible mission. Hansu went inside the train leisurely and sat next to the pillar of the train. His favorite spot. And then he saw someone getting on after him. Hansu chuckled as he asked, "Why are you guys getting on?" And at those words the three had a slightly befuddled expression. They were not stupid. An extremely suspicious train in the very bottom of the train station. And as if electricity was working in a devastated train station, the lights were on. A feeling of a jackpot. Even in games when something like this exists there will be a jackpot. No matter how one looked it did not look ordinary, but Hansu, who had psychic powers, went in there. And even with a comfortable expression. They have never seen Hansu lose tension before a battle, so the chances of there not being any battles were high. Isn't following him on obvious? But they were surprised by Hansu, who had never said anything about following him, suddenly saying things. This is one person only. Get off. Ha. Only one person can get on. Hidden piece is only permitted to one person. The train was large, but it only moved when only one person was on it. It was made so that the difficulty is at where 20 people need to come down to clear, but only one person can get on. If a god existed then he definitely had an evil hobby. That might not be the case. Sangjin mumbled with a hopeful expression. And then Tae-soon spoke after him. And is there a rule which says you have to go? We've come here with our own strengths as well. Magnetism. As Hansu glanced at the barbed snake's corpse from those words, the faces of the three all turned red. Mihi was also making an embarrassed face, but didn't really stand on Hansu's side and speak for him either. I go. You dummies. Hansu laughed inwardly. It wasn't that understanding did not exist. They've probably got the idea somewhat. Whenever a chance occurs you need to grab it. If you miss the chance because you are embarrassed or due to pride, then you will realize that that's a very foolish act. The three who were actually talking about it had their face reddened. They knew that they were pushing it as they were speaking. But they have not realized one thing yet. Of course such a rule doesn't exist, since there isn't such a thing as an absolute law in this world. Then Hansu, who was holding on to the handle of the needle, grabbed the tip instead. And as the bulky handle spun upwards the needle turned into a bat. Hung, hyung. The bat in Hansu's hands cut through the air while making threatening noises. You either get out now. Or you deal with me first, then talk nicely with your lawyer later and find me in court. Choose one of the two. Hansu laughed while looking at the three. Damnable bastard, Tae-soon cursed as he looked at the train that was quickly making distance while making clunking sounds. It was extremely alluring. That thing that was at the end of the train station. And because of that he pondered for a moment. Should the three of them try fighting him together? He even thought inwardly. Surely he won't be too cruel, we're friends and we've come this far together. If they fought and won they could take his weapon, and if they lose they could beg for forgiveness. Not a bad gamble. And if I take all the runes on his wrist. And even take whatever is at the end of the station. It was basically a jackpot. The chance of success was low, but it was a low-risk, high-return case. Tae-soon, who had finished his thoughts, tried to move his hands towards the kitchen knife on his waist but gave up as soon as he saw his eyes. The only reason he was talking over it because they didn't act out. Fucker. He was laughing and the way he was handling the situation was so. But his eyes were different. He was watching enthusiastically with eyes that could destroy someone's vitality. As if he was full of expectation to see how it was going to play out. Fuck. Fuck. He felt unfairness as he got scared from just his eyes, but he had to get off because he didn't have the courage to fight. Let's go up. We should move too. Mihi opened her mouth as she looked at Taesoon. Sangjin and Mihi were making expressions as if this situation was supposed to play out like this. Taesoon spat out curses in his mind. You retards. This is why you guys aren't capable. Why are you making such an embarrassed expression? Anybody else would have done the same thing as him. I am not sorry. I am not embarrassed. Taesoon mumbled inwardly as he grinded his teeth, raised his body and headed upwards. Ed's note. Don't forget to check out the Wikia.